Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to yet another edition then of a special production. It's called Getting to Know. It's presented by the OEM Music Centre in Belfast in association with Dig With It magazine, and also then made possible with the funding support of the PRS for Music Foundation. We've had a great run over the summer. It's been really, really magnificent, and all sorts of music and all sorts of heads. And the key really for this experience is kind of getting to know a little bit about individual artists, the kind of inspirations, but the process of composing and the whole context behind that, where the creative impulse comes from and how it reaches us. And each time there's a different way of doing that. Sometimes it's people performing live. In the case of this evening, then it's going to be a series of video snips, and it'll give us an indication of the magnificent breadth of Una Monaghan, and what an artist. We can only skim the surface this evening, but acclaim and awards from all parts of the world. Most recently, then the inaugural Liam O'Flynn Award. Bills herself essentially as a composer, a harpist, a sound engineer, and a performer, and she also lives when she chooses to in academia. A huge range of ideas. I think we should, can we get Una in now and have a chat and start this conversation? How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. I'm already enjoying this, and I know it's going to be a great experience. So I guess when so I think hopefully we're going to squeeze in about 8 pieces, and it will reflect some of the work that you've been involved in. So the piece that we're going to kind of encounter first, then, this is something that's brand new. You even a glimpse at your kind of modus operandi is that you're ceaselessly moving and ceaselessly creating and collaborating with all sorts of unlikely and exciting individuals. And then the lockdown arrives, and like everybody, it forces you into a kind of a solitude of sorts, and it. For some people, they've responded in a very active way, and other people, it's brought a degree of contemplation, reassessment. And in terms of Una, then, how did it kind of work with yourself then?
I think I didn't realize I was panicking until something happened to me physically. Like my face kind of swelled up. I came out in a sort of a rash, and I thought, what is this? And later on, I really think it was just a sort of, my mind was saying, this is all fine. We can deal with this. This is grand. And then I think I was just getting physical responses to it that were wee clues that everything wasn't really fine. And so I had a lot to work through in my head. Like you say, I had been traveling for a long time, quite regularly. Like I would have been moving about all over the place, and like everyone in music, I guess, constantly trying to play or perform, or when you weren't performing, you were trying to find out how you were going to next perform. And so I thought I was fine until I realized I wasn't really. And so I dealt with that in a couple of different ways. I started running just once. We were allowed out once per day, and that my once per day was running 5 kilometers out of the house and back and did again. And the other thing I did was I tried to have some control. So I planned out how my day was going to be, and I tried to say, well, if I'm not allowed to travel, at least I can find these parts of my practice or my work that I have either been ignoring or I haven't had time to work on, or I tried to put my energy into those. And those were the 2 ways I tried to psychologically exercise some sort of control over the situation. Not sure how well I succeeded, but I tried.
Okay, and the piece that we're going to have a listen to then, it's called Piece by Piece, and that's a bit of an indication of what you've been doing in 2020 then?
Yeah, this was something. So as you say, I think some people, when lockdown happened, there was a lot of the move online, and I was really uneasy about that. Not least because I don't tend to make videos. I tend to play, and a lot of my focus is on live performance. So I didn't really know how to make 2D versions of myself, and so I chose not to do that. I sort of went into my own practice room, but I was asked to do two pieces, and when someone rings you, especially when all the work's cancelled, then you're absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to do something. So I thought a wee bit about how I was going. This was a series run by the improvised music company and Triskel in Cork, and it was called Piece by Piece because it was a series of pieces built up one after the other with 8 artists. And the idea was the first artist made something, the second artist listened to that and then made their piece based on it in some way. And it was very open. You didn't have to use music from it if you didn't want to, but you could. So I was number 8 in that, and I had, I guess, a few weeks to get used to the situation, and then I chose then to feature the running because that had been what I'd done in lockdown, and it was a harp and electronics improvisation, and that was the video. So I think we're going to show a part of it, are we? It was a half hour long.
Yes, we have to people who are watching this in the background. We have Dee at Oh Yeah, who's kind of marshalling all the different parts together, and hopefully in a moment Dee's going to put up a little snippet then of Piece by Piece. That is the unstoppable Una Monaghan. Not even a pandemic will slow her down. Was that your traditional route, your 5K route?
It was, and it was 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, and the roads were all just empty. The only thing you could see were ambulances, health and social care vehicles, and food delivery vehicles. It was really odd, and as I was running, you sort of gave everyone a wild berth because they were very suspicious of runners. You know, these people running about with breathing all over everyone. So I would go into the middle of the road and out around people. It was a really strange time.
Okay. Well, we got a little bit of an inkling of some of your influences and some of your approaches there. So there was the laptop, there was the harp, there was a possible improvisation. There was certainly sonic experimentation going on. Your background, then, a potted history, as far as I can gather. West Belfast, you played as part of the Janet Harbinson's kind of harp orchestra when you were relatively young. And it was is it 1992, which was a kind of a big kind of was that 300 years since the 200 years since the big harp festival, and so that was a kind of a almost a year zero for you. That was an introduction to a very thrilling experience with the harp, and I think family wise you had fiddle players and a piper in your family already, so you went down that road, and that's a fair chunk of anyone's life, and you embraced it, and you traveled with Janet's ensemble, and so exciting stuff. And then to cut a very long story short, then you found yourself much later in Sonic Arts Research Centre in Belfast, and that was a world where experiences in sound, in composition, and different approaches. So at any one time you can hear those two worlds meshed in your music, and obviously you can do both or you can do either. But it's a great prerogative, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really lovely background to have been exposed to, and those early years in the Sonic Arts Research Centre were, looking back now, just brilliant. There were so many different musicians and types of musicians coming through there. Moving On Music used to run loads of gigs in there. It was my first introduction to really free improvised music, and you know, the equipment and the technology that they had there as well was just really formative, and a great gang of people experimenting and space to experiment. So I loved it.
Okay. Well, the next piece that we're going to have a look at then is terrifically exciting. It's Man of Iron, Robert Flaherty film, epic film of possibly sort of pumped up and a steroid version of what life is like in the Aran Islands, but it was a dangerous place. It was a place of epic weather and remains so, and as a piece of cinema, it stands the test of time. But what you did then, I believe it was at St. Joseph's in Sailor Town, yeah? So this was this kind of a live experience where you're relating to the film with a bunch of players. Maybe you could take it on from there then and give us an indication of what happened.
There were three of us, so this was Docs Ireland had documentary film festival, and we were asked to put together a live soundtrack to that film. And I asked Carrie Owen and Sheila Denver. So Carrie's a Welsh pianist, brilliant piano player that I met over in England, and she has a background in classical training. She's a concert pianist, but also has a real interest in Welsh folk music and in folk music that I'm interested in as well. So she was improvising at the same time. I was playing harp, concertina, and electronics, and Sheila Denver is a brilliant channel singer from Galway. So we had a skeleton of what was going to happen throughout the film, but it's a good hour long. So we had points where we were going to come in and out of folk music, but there were, in between that kind of scaffold, there were spaces for us to improvise. And I just loved the way that we each brought different training to it. And I was hoping what would happen was going to happen, where a piece of music came out of it that featured all three of us. So this is the trailer for it, and it gives a sense of the sounds on the night.
That was in Monaghan, and that was a response then to Man of Iron, Robert Flaherty film. I'm guessing by the look of that quite a lot of people in that audience were locals. They were people with a connection to Sailortown.
I'd say so, although it was a pretty big festival. So I think I love doing collaborative things like that, where you're working in a poetry festival or a film festival, because you get an audience that isn't the one that you know. So it's not, you're not advertising to maybe improvised music or traditional music or any of the places that I normally live in. And I love doing festivals where they're there to see the film, or they're there to hear the poetry, or they're there to hear something that's not you, because it means you meet new people. So I don't know where, maybe from all over, but I'd say more film fans necessarily than the music, which is great.
But it's certainly a very emotional place, given the way Sailortown has been treated, and almost political with a small p. You're taking that experience into a place like that, and raising those ghosts and raising those bits of music.
Yeah, and it was such a joy to be. I mean, especially when you're working in improvised music, you're trying to make something up in the moment. Your surroundings are so important to you in that situation, and to be in that church with all of the history. I found out close to the day as well that my grandparents had been one of the family had been baptized in the church, and it just adds to it. And there was also a display of the history that was going on. So you're working up to the gig and you're able to walk around and really get a sense of the place, and that all feeds into it. So it was lovely. I'm
Yeah.
just sitting there listening to that though, that I don't know what people can hear across this stream, but I think in general, if you've headphones, it's probably best to have them on, just because it's cutting in and out a wee bit for me.
Yes. Now, the avant-garde meeting kind of Irish culture and Irish music. You know, there are people like John Cage who did the Roratorio, where he tried to kind of evoke James Joyce and his music, and you know, would that have been a kind of something that crossed your horizon and would have inspired you down the road?
Yeah, it was at the very start of the part where I tried to be working with both influences, both the electroacoustic and experimental and the Irish traditional. He was the first person I kind of encountered doing that, and I did a reimagining of one of his scores, the oratorio score. So I spent a year making a new version of it, and it helped me get to know what he was trying to do and how effective it was. A really effective way of taking other art forms and representing them through sound. So yeah, a massive influence.
Okay. Well, we're going to watch something now. It's called Sound Experience, and you took your degree at Cambridge in astrophysics, and then you returned later as a music graduate, an MA music graduate at Cambridge. So there's a double connection with Cambridge, and this, as I understand it, I think it's called Sound Experience, and it was recorded in one of the old laboratories, but such was the day and the moment that it was sort of where female scientists were kind of penned off to kind of learn about science. You better explain it and I get it right.
We weren't allowed to use the main science labs back in the day, so they built their own anyway, and that's where they did their experiments, because just in case we would put anyone off, you know, in the main university. So that science lab is now an art space, which was great. I mean, I spent 3 years with access to that space. Again, a place that was made now used for arts and performance, but back then had been a science lab. So you come in and immediately on the right is an old fume cupboard. It's an antique, you know, wooden fume cupboard where experiments, and when you lift this thing, it's still working. You can smell the old experiments and it's amazing. So from I arrived, I thought that is the site of an installation. It's the site of and eventually in collaboration with Ida Monaghan, a visual artist, my sister as well, we put together this installation around arts and science. And the idea was that I spoke to a load of scientist friends over there and I asked them to describe their work. And when you took out the words that were to do with the science specifically, if you took out all of those words, the way they spoke about their work and their attitude to experimentation and the things that they were trying to do were exactly the same as what artists were trying to do. And so we had 2 test tubes, and one of the test tubes had a microphone in it, and then there was another microphone observer. So the microphone that was part of the experiment and the microphone that was the onlooker. And these test tubes, Ida hung them so that they left the fume cupboard. So they went out the window. We hung them on fishing wire out through the window. And then we took the audio from the test tubes to make the sound of the installation. But it was really one of those situations where you come up with an idea and halfway through you realise it's really not going to work. You need to go back to plan B. So the idea was that these test tubes would be hanging and they would bump off one another and the noise of the glass would be recorded and processed. So I thought, well, this is great. We'll get a flame and I'll make the heat from the flame will make these things move, and that'll be what will make the chinks. So I was there trying to get a flame not to burn these 400-pound microphones. And I realized that they were all too heavy for the flame to move. So this then spawned another sound experiment, really, where I was trying to get these things to move without too much noise or without burning the place down. And we used fans, but as soon as you put a fan in, you've then got the fan noise, which becomes part of the audio installation. So the final product was a fan, and the test tubes moved, the microphones took the sound and it was processed, and then we also included parts of the speech from these scientists. So this is a wee snippet of it anyway.
I'm going to go after it, and I'm going to have to figure out a way of piecing it together.
You're describing something that's already there.
Okay, I can't do it without any mistakes anymore. I'm going to have to make some mistakes, and that's going to be okay.
Sometimes it takes longer. Like when you first see it, you don't realize it. You need to think about it.
I want to know about this person's experience in all these different kind of aspects.
For some people to really be able to, to just connect.
It's just an interpretation, and it can change from one person to another.
With certain results like popped up and they became, all of a sudden I found I had certain discovery moments.
And how they made it theirs.
I don't do experiments in the sort of traditional popper kind of way.
So you don't have a complete picture in the beginning, right? So then when you put everything together,
there's a pinch of creativity in all of this.
Fantastic. That reminds me, a little bit about like Bletchley Park or something like that. A place that has secrets and a place that the story has not been properly told. And so,
that's like everywhere.
Yeah.
I love the part where the scientist said, I'm not going to do it perfectly anymore. I'm going to have to make some mistakes. And I just thought if every artist, if I knew that years ago, like I'd have been a lot quicker at making stuff, once you allow yourself to make some mistakes, I really like that. And I thought this is great because we're all the same, of course.
Yeah. And then sometimes when you let the phantoms out of a building or out of a piece of history, there's the incredible energy comes out of that process too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, all of the people were current scientists there, but we had the imagery and the equipment from back then, and you wonder what the walls would have said.
So we've seen quite a lot already that evidences your avant-garde, your experimental thing, your role as a sound producer. And I think it came out recently in an interview. You were talking also about Brian Wilson. You were talking about the Beach Boys. So it's not popular music and I guess bold popular musicians have registered in your array of inspirations as well. Then.
Of course, yeah. I listen to a lot of different music, and often the music I listen to is nothing like the music I try to play. So yeah, big fan of the Beach Boys. Really, I used to go to as many concerts as I could, both of Brian Wilson and the touring Beach Boys. Did a wee tour to California and had a look around all the pilgrimage sites. So yeah, love that music.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to have another little piece now. This is called Canter, and I think again this is fairly fresh out of the wrapper. It's a piece that you've been working on. Is it Lyra Pramick? Is that?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit. This is a piece of theatre, then.
Yeah, she's based in Berlin. She is a vocalist and she works with electronics as well. I first met her a good few years ago and we stayed in touch. I met her in America and then she moved over to Germany. And so there was, maybe 2 years ago, I just called her and said, listen, do you mind if I come over? I just wondered how it would be if we made music together, not least because she works a bit with beats and I very much don't. Most of the stuff I do doesn't have a rhythm in it, or if it does, it disappears pretty quickly. So it's interesting to me to try and see what, when you've been working in a certain way, to try and bring in an influence that is not your usual, and so to see what you would do. It's interesting to me to see how I would react to that. And I just missed drums and beats, and if you can't do it yourself, you ask someone else to. So I went over just for a weekend, and I said, well, we just spend a day in the studio and see what happens. So this is a collaboration between the pair of us. She ended up not singing on it, as far as I know, unless some of the samples were from her vocals. It's mostly harp that you hear, and her production too. So this is, we've just had it mastered, and this is the first time it's been played.
And this is called Canter. In the Monaghan, you must be so pleased that the way something like that came out. I degree of surprise. I guess you have to wait until you see how your partner's going to respond to that in case later. Then,
Yeah, I mean, we were in the same space, so we built it in one day. It wasn't during lockdown. It was a few years ago, and maybe 2 years ago. And then we sort of sat on it for a while, and I think that was part of what happened when all the gigs were off too. I was thinking, well, what have I not had time to do? And that was one of them. So there have been good things about not running around the place all the time. You see what you have that you haven't paid attention to. So that's been nice.
and the harp is such an iconic instrument, and you know, you grew up listening to some of those, the bunting melodies and all of the things that are part of the harp story. You probably encounter a few people are going, how can you put glitches and beats with a harp? So, you know, sometimes I guess you're challenging expectations or a degree of sanctity that's maybe connected to the instrument.
Yeah, I mean, I did spend a lot of the early part of my musical work as a kid and as a teenager playing really beautiful music. And I don't really know exactly what it is. I think it is iconic in that way, but it also carries a lot of baggage. You know, you never really know when you're playing a lovely slow air or a really nice harmonic thing if people are going, oh, that's gorgeous, or if they're going, oh, it's sickly, or it's, and so I don't know. I still obviously return to that, and there are times when I'm on my own playing and I'm playing harp music and it's gorgeous, never going to get old. But I think when I'm trying to think of what to do that's newer or that, yeah, it's probably been that I've played an instrument that's hard to make it sound bad and it's hard to make it sound strange. So that has been an interest to me. In saying that, if you work with computers, you often get the other end of the scale. So you often get noise music, you often get glitches, you often get things that don't quite work. And so for me to have a big piece of baggage that will always sound harmonious in the face of that is also a pretty nice thing to have in your luggage, you know. So I use it in both ways, and I do like to see how I can interrupt it. It's a really hard instrument to process because, from a computer point of view, because it has that long tail. So unless you damp the strings, it's going to have resonance, and if you make any cuts or if you introduce any processing, you do get cuts in the music, and it's very obvious. So I tend to use it all rather than try and avoid that, you know.
Okay, we have quite a bunch of music that we want to get in, and we're kind of a bit squeezed for time. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. We're going to have a listen to another little piece now, which I think is another new piece. It's called Taxi. There's a little video, and I think I see Culterland at one stage in it. Yeah, you were on the Falls Road at some point. Then, yeah.
Yeah, I'm from West Belfast, and the black taxis would have been, you know, the mode of transport that I grew up with. And I remember being in one, and this was years ago now. I don't know how long, it's within the last 10, and I was looking at the man's rosary beads, the drivers, and they were hanging down, and you know they were green, white, and orange rosary beads, and it was just a great image, and you could see his eyes in the rear view mirror as well. And I was on my own in the taxi, I think, and I just remember thinking, what an image. And also the rain of Belfast, like, you know, it was rainy outside, and I've just been in so many taxis. It used to be back in the day that the taxis were a lot noisier. Like the taxis would stop and the engine on them would be making this rhythm. You weren't sure it was going to go again, like. And now they're a lot newer and cleaner, but there's something about the black taxis I'll always love. Anyway, I got out at the end of Castle Street and I said to the guy, listen, I took a video of you in the back there. Is it okay if I use it? And you're doing it, you're trying to explain to them that you want to use it for strange music or you want to use it as an installation. And he's looking at me like I'm about 10 heads and he's going, what? What do you want to use it for? And I'm saying, I'm just going to put music to it. And he's like, aye, whatever. So I got his lesson anyway. I'm not sure that he knew exactly what he was signing up to, but it's a nice video, I think.
But this is it. That's glorious. That was Taxi. And even better when you hear the explanation. So we're going to do the equivalent of what you do in radio. You seg very quickly from one track to the next. So the next one is called The Choice. Can you give us a very brief thought about this, and then we'll go straight in?
Yeah, it's a piece about addiction, and there are many faces of addiction. It can be really bad, but there can be hope in it too. So this is just an excerpt of a piece about addiction.
Okay, that was an excerpt from a piece of music called Choice. And I should point out that the armbands or the little wristbands that were on that's not merely a fashion affectation. There's a kind of a sonic dimension to what's going on there as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I use a motion sensor in some of my pieces, so I'm always trying to find ways that makes most sense to communicate with the computer and control the sound processing. And one of the ways I do that is with the motion sensor. So when you see it, it's held to the hand by a not very sophisticated cut up sock.
Does the job. Why question it? Yeah, listening to kind of what you're doing with Harp there, and thinking about other people who have tried to bring new aspects to that, and 40, 50 years ago, Sean O'Reilly was listening to kind of, I guess, courtly music and harps and trying to put a new experience around that, and ultimately led to the chieftains and all sorts of other things. I think he used a harpsichord on a lot of his music. Is that someone that would have registered on your interest horizon?
Oh yes, a giant in terms of the history of Irish traditional music and its influence in combination with other genres. Yeah, Carter Cool and O'Reilly Spaghetti would have been a really important CD in our house as I was growing up. And I love his orchestral music as well. It was one of the tracks that I picked recently when I was trying to put together 20 odd that I really loved. Was Misha Era. So yeah, gorgeous music.
Okay, so we're at a time, I know, when we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic, but it's still a desperately fragile time, and we're thinking a lot about the arts. We're thinking about musicians, about venues, about festivals, about people like the OEM Music Centre and Moving On Music and stuff who are trying to bring people together and make exciting things happen. And the next piece, before we hear it, the next piece is called Jam Jar, and that sort of, I guess, in a way, encapsulates the idea of different partnerships and different people and different venues. And are you thinking much at the minute about our ecostructure, about how everything is sort of related and I guess under threat and sometimes not necessarily valued by the bean counters in this world, and yet we still have to bash on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the reaction after the pandemic has not really come as that much of a surprise. I don't think it has been valued enough before COVID either. I picked this piece with Jam Jar, I guess, out of a bit of a sense of nostalgia for a time when it was a series that ran in the Black Box in Belfast, done by Moving On Music, and it was one where artists collaborated, and also there was a thread with the audience. We got the audience involved in raffle and jam and in communicating with us about the music, and there was a Q&A session after the pieces, and yeah, it really is a whole head change about what it is we do now. And just speaking from a personal point of view, I mean, there just are no gigs at the minute, and I'm still creating, but it's about every day waking up and thinking how we're creating and how to communicate that and what works for each person individually, because there's a lot online, but I've been moving quite slowly in terms of, and thinking a lot about how I'm going to put things out and how I'm happy communicating, because for me it's always been about a connection with the audience, connection with other musicians, and that is hard. It's hard in 2D and it's hard on the internet. And I think there are drawbacks to it that I personally need to go slowly before I'm happy enough as to what those drawbacks are. Yeah, I'm worried. I'm lucky enough at the minute to be continuing to make things on my own mostly. I'm hopeful though. I think we'll weather this one like we've weathered lots of things. I think that people are very creative. They value their relationships with other artists and with audiences, and I think we'll find a way. I think everyone needs to mind their head, and I've seen a few different resources for artists in that respect. I'm really grateful, as I'm sure everyone is, for the different initiatives that there have been to pay artists during this time. I think it's been brilliant, and anyone, myself included, who has benefited from some of those schemes, it has been wonderful. But yeah, I mean, we hope that the government and the bean counters, as you call them, will support. But I think if they don't, it's not the first time that's happened, and it's about community, about other artists, and about connecting with audience in whatever way you can.
Okay. Well, let's have a little look at this piece then, the Jam Jar piece. That was a little snippet then from the Jam Jar experience. We're nearly done with this experience this evening, which is getting to know Una Monaghan. And thank you very much to the OEM Music Centre who've delivered this once again in association with Dig With It magazine and PRS Foundation, and put together with Charlotte. And it's been fantastic. You've also provided one of the most memorable experiences for me this year, which there was a memorial service for Kieran Carson at the Lyric Theatre, and you put together this piece of music, which kind of, this is someone who's a poet, who's written a beautiful book, who's a traditional musician, who's a Gaelgar, and that all seemed to come together in that piece of music that you delivered for him at the Lyric, isn't that right?
Yeah, I love collaborating with other artists, and Kieran was a brilliant artist. The piece that you heard was the one I was talking about earlier, based on a score by John Cage. It was the tape part of that, so the direction by John Cage and based on one of Kieran's books. So yeah, it was some me, but not all me. Yeah, a lovely night, and Kieran's work, reading it at any point is always a source of inspiration. And I think he performed in that version of the John Cage score. He read the snippets from his own book, and I think he really enjoyed the performative aspect of it as well, being a musician.
Yes, yes. Well, thanks to everyone. Thanks also to Dee, who's in the background, kind of putting all the videos up and down. And I do believe there's going to be more getting to know issues as we go through the remainder of the summer. So watch all the socials and and you can watch this back and you can invite your friends to watch back. Very finally, then, Una, you've chosen something that you delivered. And it's partly a Canadian Newfoundland exchange. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, this was a piece that I was asked to write for someone who is Canadian but has Irish heritage, and it's a piece of harp music, so no electronics involved in this one. I was asked to make a video for it again during lockdown, and my thoughts around it were I didn't want to just put up a camera of me playing in a room, so I tried to find a way to represent a visual that was different and didn't involve my face really. So this is a close-up of the heartstrings, and I think it's interesting to be in a place where you're not that close to an instrument normally. So I enjoyed doing the video for this, and it's called the Dobbin Compositions.
that was 2 races then, close in mind and 2 months by the sea. And there's an hour has just hurtled past. It's been great. I'm absolutely in awe. You are ceaseless, and I'm sure whatever remains this year, that when we're out at large, you'll make the most of it.
I'm hoping so. When we're allowed out.
Yeah. And how's the 5K running? Are you still powering up and down the road?
No, it's tapered off a wee bit now that we're allowed out twice a day. So I don't know. It did me good. Like it was good. I might try and get into it again. Doing a wee bit more playing though, so that's good.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for everyone involved in Monaghan. Long may you run.
Thank you very much.